Good morning, Brother Chad Long here, Delhi Baptist Church. We are studying the book of Ruth together, looking at, we will be looking at our kinsman and redeemer in Christ. Not everybody's familiar with that, so we'll get to that, but we won't get that far this morning, I don't think. But I think what is key in chapter 1 is the choices we make and the commitments that we stick with. Sometimes it becomes necessary in life for us to venture out and do things that we just need to experience in order to bring us closer to God. Sometimes we have to experience some things, and He knows that. I grew up in Paris, and I remember the first time I left Paris for any reason at all. I remember the first time I went to the Metroplex. I was about 17 years old, and we got lost off of Loop 820 in Fort Worth. And I think, if I remember right, my girlfriend and I at the time were taking a friend home that lived there or had lived there. It was in Paris, and it broke down. I don't remember all the specifics. It was 20 years ago or more. But I remember getting lost after we dropped our friend off, trying to head back home, and we pulled into a gas station, and it was late at night. And I remember I was wearing blue jeans, Wranglers is what I usually wore, and I remember a blue T-shirt. I think it said Dallas Cowboys on it. My girlfriend was wearing something skimpy, like a blue bikini top, and it was summertime, and some blue shorts. So we're dressed in blue. We pulled into a store in Fort Worth, this convenience store. I was low on oil. I drove an old Chevy pickup at the time, and I needed some oil, and we were trying to find directions to get back on the right highway to get home. And we just on the wrong side of town, didn't know anything about anything, and you're wondering why I'm being so descriptive about my clothing. While we were sitting there, this gang of men came up. I guarantee you there were 7, 8 of them. Now we're just sitting at a convenience store in Fort Worth, Texas. This gang of men comes up and surrounds us, kind of, positions himself around us. And I noticed one of the men had a pistol in his waistband, walking around with it like that. And this was before open carry. This is 24 years ago. Anyhow, and they were spouting off and cursing because we were in their territory on their turf and wearing the wrong colors. And I said, "Friend, I don't know anything about your colors. This is just, I like the Dallas Cowboys. I'm wearing blue jeans, and I didn't put no thought into any colors." I noticed every one of them was wearing something either red, white, or green. They're all wearing mostly like white T-shirts or tank tops with either red scarves or green. The pants, I don't know, all their accessories had red or green in them. I guess white was a neutral color. I don't know. I don't know what green had to do with anything. But I didn't know anything about Bloods or Crips or gangs or gang signs. This was a crash course. I had never been out of Paris, and we didn't have all that in Paris. Or if we did, I didn't know it. So anyway, as we look at this story, I want you to consider sometimes when you get away from the familiar, you get away from what you know, you experience some scary stuff. That was a scary night for us. The Lord was with us, and we got out of there. But the Lord's always with us. It's just whether or not we choose to trust in Him, whether or not we choose to commit to Him. And so I'll remind you where we left off yesterday. Ruth is from Moab, and she didn't do anything wrong to be from Moab. I don't fault Naomi for being there. Her husband led her there, and she went dutifully as a wife. But there's been nothing but tragedy since they left home. It doesn't always work that way. Sometimes the Lord will lead you to another place like He did Abraham, like He did my family when we moved to Delhi. I'm not telling people not to leave home. What I'm saying is make sure the Lord's in your decisions and make sure that you're committed to Him and what He wants for your life. Because He can take you to Egypt and support you if that's where He wants you. But when we go for all the wrong reasons and without his hand upon it, that's when we seem to suffer the most. And you're going to see this here. But I feel a little bad for Ruth. She so far she appears to be a good-hearted, committed woman who wants to do the right thing. Happens to be from a place that has a bad reputation, which is not her fault. But she shows a lot of character, and she shows a heart that wants to commit to the God of her mother-in-law, which is a picture of her conversion. And we're just going to look at it, okay? We'll back up a little from where we left off yesterday to read into it. But verse 15 of chapter 1 says, "And she said, Behold, this is Naomi speaking. Thy sister-in-law is gone back to her people and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law." Basically, she says, your sister is going back to her people and back to her idolatry. Her commitment to me and to God, it was not sincere. It was an emotional thing. And nothing drives me more nuts than somebody who I really believe got converted, who, I mean, they shed some tears, they pour out their heart, they tell you how rough their life is and how they really want Jesus and they love him, and they have an emotional experience. And in that moment, I think they really believe that they're coming to Christ. And some of them, I mean, as long as they mean it in their heart, they're saved. But some of them don't mean it in their heart. Some of them do, but then they don't mean it as far as a commitment. I was one of those. I got saved as a little boy, and I meant every word of it until I saw the commitment that was required, and I wasn't ready. It was many years later before I gave my life to Christ. I gave him my heart, but I didn't give him my life. So anyway, I don't know if Orpah got saved or not. I know that she returns to her people and her idolatry, but it's possible at some point when she got back to her land that she recommitted her life to the Lord and maybe even became a witness to her own people. You never know who all was affected by Orpah's life later. We don't know. We just know that she goes back to her people and by extension her gods. Whether that was a permanent decision or a temporary one, we will never know this side of heaven. But she goes back. Verse 16, Ruth says, Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. But whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and my God, thy God, my God. Now, if you wanted to break these down, there's a sevenfold decision and commitment here. And I'm not going to break down all seven, because what you're doing is you're taking one big decision and breaking it up in parts. And I've read some theologians that do that. But what you need to understand here is she was all in. 7 represents completeness. And we sing a song in church, I surrender all. In fact, we don't sing it a lot, but we sing it. And I love the song, but we don't always mean it. Some people will sing that song, come down the aisle with tears filling their eyes, and kneel at the altar and pray. And they'll mean it to an extent. I surrender all today. I surrender most of all, or I surrender these problems to you, Lord, but I can't give you all. I got to hold on to some of these little pet things that I can't let go of. And that's the problem, is when you lay everything on the altar and you say, I'm yours, Lord, you're supposed to leave it all there and let him have control. And unfortunately, we have a habit, not we, but people have a habit of getting up from that altar and starting to pick those things back up, putting them back in their pockets, or back the burden back on the shoulders, or at least some of it. And that's one of the problems we have. When you make a commitment like this, you've got to go all in, which is a poker term, and I don't play poker, but I mean, you got to give it everything. You've got to mean it with all your heart. You've got to be committed. If you could get more Christians to be committed, and I mean fully committed, this world would flip around in a hurry. And I can't do anything about the world. But those of you who can hear me, I'm trying to ask you, please. You can make a difference in your church. You can make a difference in your community. You can make a difference in your household directly. If you just commit, and I mean really commit. And while there may not be enough of us to do that to completely change the world, if everybody would commit like that, we could. could start right here at home and spread the thing across our nation and then across the world if people would just commit. Um, Joseph is a great example of one man who can make a huge difference. And we're not talking about Joseph, but Ruth is too. Ruth is one of those people too. And we're going to see that. I'm getting ahead of myself. But she says, I want to go with you. Don't keep me from going. I'm going to go where you go. I'm going to live where you live. I'm going to be, your people be my people, and your God will be my God. She meant I'm going wherever you go, and I'm sticking with you, and you have all of me. There's not an ounce of selfishness in these statements. There's not an ounce of I want to have my will, what I want in these statements. There's not a, there's so many admirable traits about what she said, and mostly because she meant it. When's the last time, Christian, that you said anything like this to God and meant it? I mean, really meant it. Lord, I'm yours. I'm not saying that you haven't. I'm asking you. I can tell you that I've had to make that same statement. And I told the Lord if He sent me to Africa, I'd go. China, just wherever. And I meant it. And I still mean it. And that's just what we have to do. Verse 17 says, where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. She says, I'm here till death. Till death do us part. You know, marriage is a picture of a commitment to the Lord. I mean, I understand marriage is commitment to a spouse, and it's a beautiful thing that God invented and must be between a man and a woman to be called marriage. But marriage is a picture of a larger commitment, one that we're supposed to make to Christ. So if we can commit to a human being, we ought to be able to commit to our divine Lord and Savior for life. Let me tell you this. I'm going to make a lot of mistakes, and I'm going to fail a lot. And people who catch me are probably going to think a lot less of me because I'm a pastor and because they think that I'm supposed to be sinless. But let me tell you something. It will be death that separates me and Christ. If anything ever does, it'll be death. Because I'm going to follow Him till I die. And see, that won't separate us. That's when we'll be reunited face to face. But that's how committed you have to be. I'm going to move on because I need to. But you understand what she's saying, and I hope you understand what I'm saying. Verse 18, when she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her. When people see the commitment, they'll honor and respect your commitment. And Naomi respected her decision and said, you know what, this girl made up her mind. I got to honor that. I got to respect that. Let me tell you something. People have respect for someone who knows what they're trying to do or knows where they're trying to go. That, you know, they've made up their mind and they're standing by their convictions. People lose respect for you when you don't know from one day to the next what you're trying to do or where you're trying to go. Now, I understand there's some situations where you don't. I know children, or I say children, young people in college who still don't know what they want to be or what they want to do. And there's periods in life where we'll have that. But at least where the Lord is concerned, we've got to show a commitment and we've got to stick with it. And I know I've hammered that to death. But people will respect that. They'll respect the fact that whether they agree with you or not, that you're committed and that you know what you're doing and where you're trying to go. Verse 19, so they two went until they came to Bethlehem, and it came to pass when they were come to Bethlehem, all the city was moved about them, and they said, is this Naomi? I love this verse because it's easy to overlook that the city was happy to see her come home. I bet they wish she'd come home sooner. And I know she wishes she had gone home sooner. Wishing probably they'd never left because they left out of the will of God. They left out of, well, they left for all the wrong reasons. But when they get back, when she gets back, the whole city's moved. That may be a bit of an exaggeration, but there's a pretty good group anyway. A good part of the city cared enough about Naomi that when she came home, they were moved. That's a wonderful feeling, and I think it's a picture I think it's a picture of the way that a good church or a good home or the way anybody who loves you is going to feel when you come back to where you were supposed to be all along. May even be, spiritually speaking, may even be a picture of heaven and how heaven will rejoice. In fact, the Bible says angels rejoice over one sinner who repents and accepts Christ. So anyway, they get there, and everybody's like, is this Naomi? They haven't seen her in some time. And she said to them, don't call me Naomi, because Naomi means pleasant, and I'm not very pleasant right now. She says, call me Mara, for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. So why then would you call me Naomi, seeing the Lord hath testified against me, and the Almighty hath afflicted me? Now, I don't think that the Lord had done these things directly to her. While He permits things to happen, He's not behind everything. The Bible says God cannot sin. He does not commit. He's not tempted, and He doesn't sin. So when we encounter evil, we have to remember the evil in this world was brought on by the poor choices of man, starting with Adam. And sometimes they lead to some things that, well, they contribute to our sorrow, but they're not God's fault. And He's always there for us. I don't know why her sons were sick and weak. I don't know if they were born that way or if it's something that they encountered when they went to Moab. Sometimes when you meet and mingle with other peoples, you pick up diseases and sicknesses that you wouldn't otherwise have come in contact with. I know there's all kinds of stories in history where the Europeans, when they encountered the Indians, brought sicknesses with them, and vice versa. Sometimes when one people group is hanging out with another people group, they'll bring something they're unfamiliar with, and it'll cause them some tragedy. That may have been the reason that her sons died. I don't know that. I don't have any idea. But you can't blame that on God if you're not in the will of God. Now, if you're doing what God asked you to do and something bad happens to you, well, then maybe we can have a conversation. But they were out of the will of God. So she puts a little too much of this on the Lord here. But what's important to remember out of this verse is she went out full. She came home empty, like the prodigal son. And this story is very similar to the prodigal son story, because while I don't blame Naomi for leaving, she did leave. They went out full and they come home empty. And let me tell you this, because you need to get it. Sometimes the Lord needs us empty so He can fill us. When we are full, or when we think we're full, it's hard for Him to put anything in us, to build any character traits or use us for His glory. So sometimes this is necessary, and whether He does it or He allows it, He still uses it for our benefit. Everything from coronavirus to our economical status, to our health status, our spiritual status, everything that has to do with our lives is supposed to glorify Him. And if we think we're good, we're content, we're full, we're happy, we don't have any problems, it is incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for God to use or bless us. We've got to have a spot in us open to Him working in our lives. And so she goes out empty. She goes out full. She comes back empty. And now God can work with her. Sometimes what you and I need are to have all that fullness emptied. Sometimes we've got to be brought down a little bit so God can use us. And it's not fun, but it's necessary sometimes. And the only way to keep that from being necessary is keep ourselves humble, keep our eyes on the Lord, be ready to learn something, change something in our lives. She says, I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Don't call me Naomi, because the Lord is against me, is what she's saying. Verse 22 says, Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, which returned out of the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of barley harvest. Now we're going to pick up there, Lord willing, tomorrow, and why that's important. But she came home at a good time. There's plenty. Hey, during barley harvest, there's going to be food to eat. Even if it's not hers, there'll be enough to go around and they can survive for a while. See, and I'll say this, and I'm through for today. Whether it's your blessings or not, if you're amongst the right people, There's blessings enough to go around. So she goes home, and she doesn't have any barley to speak of, but because they're having a barley harvest, she can be a part of it. She can enjoy the blessings with them. The same is true today. If you join a church or congregate with a group of people that God is blessing, well, those blessings are going to spill over to you too. And that's why it's so important. We don't stop congregating. We don't stop going and spending time with our Christian brethren. It's hard for God to move the way that He wants to when we won't go near His people. We just kind of stay by ourselves. And I know that the virus has caused some of that, but sometimes we do that too. We self-isolate for various reasons, or because we get our feelings hurt. I don't know, but it's important that we stay near the people that God has put in our lives, and try to bless them, let them bless us, and try to honor God in all we do. You guys have a wonderful day, and Lord willing, we'll see you tomorrow, and we'll get into chapter 2.